Broadcasting or start webinar? I don't see a start webinar.
It should be, this meeting has started, so it's automatically started. You should start seeing people, well, you won't see people coming in because it's just you. It's been enabled. Yep, it started.
Okay. Well, Dan, according to my clock, we have about 16 seconds till kickoff, so I'll let you call it when you're ready.
All right, we'll just wait until the clock ticks. So to be fair to everyone. Yeah. All right. So I guess it's noon and we'll be prompt. Welcome everybody to Chicago Market's Fast Track 360 Feasibility Project. We will move at a pretty fast pace today, but we are doing that in favor of having ample time for questions at the end. So buckle up. We're gonna jump right in. So I'm gonna get it over to you, Kay.
Thanks, Dan. My name is Kay Kirsch. I work with Firebrand Cooperative. We're a worker co-op, and I am one of the owners there. I do consulting, and my real title is project strategist. Project management is my core competency, if you will. I've been doing that work in a lot of different varieties and sectors, from nonprofits to startups in the tech and the healthcare industry, and also in the co-op community. Like most project managers, I dabble in a lot of things. So I also have retail management and nonprofit operational experience, and do a lot of work with communications and development work. I also sit on a couple boards and know the food co-op experience from the board perspective due to a lot of board experience that I've had over the years in a variety of different sectors. And I'll be presenting today along with my partner, Dan.
All right, so I'm Dan Arnett, and I'm actually the general manager of Chicago Market at this point. But for the purposes of the work we did with Firebrand, I was merely a consultant from back then. I have been a food co-op manager for almost 22 years now in various shapes and forms in now 4 states across 5 co-ops. I do have a master management cooperative credentials, as you see there. That's at St. Mary's in Halifax, in case you're interested in looking that one up, and maybe you'll be a future student in that program. I also did teach cooperative business with Presidio and Pincho MBA schools, graduate school. And as I said, I'm currently general manager here at Chicago Market, and I'm the treasurer on the board of Fair Trade America, which the little symbol you see with the hand raised is Fair Trade. That's us doing the certifying and a lot of the advocacy and support. So anyway, that's a little bit about us.
And we're here today to talk about the Chicago Market Project. We put together a really innovative project last summer that we're going to tell you about, a whole feasibility assessment that we did. And Dan and I are going to frame it up for you, talk you through what we were asked to do, how we went through the process, and some interesting findings we found along the way that we think have some really interesting learning opportunities and some insights for the co-op community. We all know Q&A is the best part of every presentation, so we promise to save at least 30 minutes, if not more, for Q&A. Please hold your questions till the end. If you want to drop them in the chat while you think of a question, we'll go through and go through that all at the end. So that's kind of how we'll handle the Q&A. So this track today is all about the shift, new things that are happening in the co-op community. And the reason we were asked to do this presentation today is because we did some really innovative things last summer. We were able to fast track a full store design and feasibility assessment for a food co-op in 8 weeks, and not only give them the preliminary store designs and equipment lists and a pro forma that was battle tested and solid, but even have kind of really granular development of the store programming to really test and make sure that this pro forma was going to stand up. We looked at the market feasibility, the financial feasibility, assessing the capability of the co-op and the leadership, and it was really a whole 360-degree view of the feasibility of this project in this site. And we worked with a multi-organizational project. I see Kevin O'Donnell is with us already. I think Carla from Retail Planet's going to be here. We had people from different organizations coming together experts carefully selected to bring their expertise to this project. And that really created a unique dynamic that gave us some fascinating results. So our mission, less than a year ago, Chicago Market came to us with an unusual request. They had secured this beautiful site, an iconic building in the heart of uptown Chicago that used to be a train station. There is quite literally a train track above the store. And they won it through an RFP process, a bidding process, where they kind of had to pitch, why they were going to be the best tenant for this location. And they were in an active lease with the Chicago Transit Authority for this site. They had been working for years to set up their co-op and been working with a team of consultants to get the store design laid out, figure out what the co-op was going to look like in this beautiful store that they had secured. Unfortunately, due to some challenges with the store design, it's a triangular shape, which always makes designing the store a little bit more challenging. And some of the things that the co-op really wanted, the consulting team at that time told them that their project was not viable. They tested, they worked, they tried kind of every scenario and every solution. But at the end of the day, they realized as responsible board members that their project was not going to be viable. And they actually reached out to their landlord and said, we need to get out of our lease. We're not going to be moving forward. At that point, the CTA brought forward some new concessions, which were nice and generous and maybe would be enough to change the game for this co-op. So they went back to their consulting team, said, okay, new concessions on the table. Do we think this is enough to help us flip over to a viable project? And the team at that time said, we could look at it, but our gut is probably not. Co-op, of course, you invest your hopes and dreams, and particularly in a beautiful, iconic site like this. So they double checked. They went to NCG and said, could you just take a look? And unfortunately, NCG at that time was responding to COVID, and very rightly, they were focusing all their resources on supporting their stores. So they didn't have capacity at that moment. So Chicago Market came to Firebrand and said, can you put together a team? We just need a fresh perspective, maybe fresh eyes, new ideas, some new problem solving. Can you honestly tell us, is there any viable path forward for us in this location? And they, as a board, were also willing to kind of shift from this is what our co-op has to have, very specific prescriptive programming that they wanted, to tell us what will work in this site. So they were very open and ready to kind of let us explore and figure out what would be the best programming in the best store that would be viable in this location. So that was the challenge, our plan to tackle the work. And keep in mind, the landlord was expecting an answer about whether they were go or no go. And they needed to have a really deep feasibility assessment within 8 weeks. So we had to turn this around quickly, because if they did decide to walk away from this site, they didn't want to leave their landlord hanging for months and months and months. So we had a very tight project plan. Week 1, we're going to launch it, get immersed in the situation, read all the existing store design and documentation and the planning. Week 2, we got on site, met with the board. Our whole team came together for the first time. Those of us who were able to travel. We took heaps of photos, even 3D imagery, to help our non-traveling team members get a sense of the space and the community. Just got on site and checked out what was happening on the ground. Our team then really had 4 weeks to do the work, where we did all the store layout, problem solving, figured out the programming, looking at the market feasibility and the financial feasibility and all those other intangible feasibility factors. Week 7, we double checked our work, tested every scenario, ran projections up and down. And then week 8, we pulled it all together in a final report for Chicago Market. The team we assembled was myself. I was doing the project management and bringing my own retail management and operational expertise to the table. JQ Hanna was with us from Food Co-op Initiative, and you all know what a great and deeply experienced cooperator she is, and operational person and strategy. So Z was highly important to helping us figure out this project. Carla Kruger from Retail Planet was with us as our store designer. And she was a great asset because she knew the Chicago market really, really well and brought a lot of valuable insights based on her experience in that market. And we knew, being on top of a train station, that getting the prepared foods right was going to be huge. So we had Kevin O'Donnell to come in and not just give us a high level indication of what we needed for the prepared foods, but actually go incredibly deep and leave Chicago market with a plan for how their prepared food program needed to be developed. The project launch, as I mentioned, we had some store design issues. We'll dig into those later on, but high level, they were receiving. There were some operational inefficiencies due to the entrance locations and the need for multiple checkout stations in different areas of the store. Midtown Chicago, we had security issues as well. And it kind of had to make it all work in this triangular shaped store. So we had some ideas about how we might solve this before we got on site. And once we got together with the store design team, we pretty much solved the problem when we were in the space within the first hour or so. So we feel like we had a good grasp on that. Store design team had to go back and draw it all up, but our theory actually ended up working quite well. On the site visit, we also pounded the pavement and went and visited dozens of competitors, even had an informal focus group of likely co-op shoppers in the neighborhood, and really dug deep into the market study data as well, looking at what was there, poking what was maybe inferred or assumed, but wasn't explicitly in the report, just double checking all of our assumptions, even catching up with the market study provider to make sure that what we were seeing or what it seemed to be indicated was actually what she was thinking as well. And as we started doing that, particularly the market study is where things started to come together. The sales projection per square foot for this store were higher than 95% of the sales projections for startup food co-ops that JQ had seen in the last decade. So there was some crazy serious potential here with the sales volume. So we looked at that and went, why? Why is that so high? And we read the whole market study. They looked at this site, but also other sites, and the other sites in the neighborhood did not compare to this exact location. This was the standout location. We realized pretty quickly that those sales projections came from the extreme density of the population. We're in the middle of Chicago. It's a world-class city. There's a lot of people nearby who are potential co-op shoppers. And that was kind of the key factor that was driving just the really, really high sales potential. We also realized, because it was literally, like I said, underneath the train station, and because it was such a pedestrian friendly inner city, urban core neighborhood, we were going to have mostly pedestrian shoppers, which means slightly different consumer behavior. So we pulled up the walk scores and saw these amazing walk and bike and transit scores for this location. And our market study person confirmed that she anticipated that 75% of the traffic would be pedestrian traffic at this site. So we knew that that was going to change some things about how we thought about the store when it comes to access, traffic flowing through the store, the programming, what consumers need and what they prioritize, and also the product mix. So as we really came to grips with the urban density thing, we knew we needed some help. I'm from Fargo, JQ is from a mid-sized college town, and we reached out to some of the world-class food co-ops in our dense urban cores, places like Flatbush in Brooklyn and Central in Seattle. And we bumped into Dan and reached out to him just to get some indication about, talk to us about this. What does this look like? And to our delight and surprise, he not only was willing to give some input, but rolled up his sleeves and jumped in with us on the project. So he became our +1 on our project team, joining us and helping us get this project right. And I'm going to hand it over to him now to tell you more about what's really unique about dense urban markets.
So a lot of work had gone on in this project for some time, and there were a lot of things that have been identified quite correctly, and there was a lot of really good work. There had been talented people involved before. But there were a few things that I saw that were maybe a little different in reality. When we talk about a dense urban environment, um, the first thing that is glaringly different to me is the potential for margin attainment. Assuming that you have the kind of demographics and psychographics that we have in this area. And when you look at these hyper dense urban markets, um, you'll see that the margins are not under the same kind of pressure, that shoppers are not as price sensitive. So the idea that you have to lowball or try to become the low cost leader just isn't true. So that's the first thing, is I'm looking at department by department. What is the margin attainment versus what I know my teams have achieved when I've managed stores in dense urban environments, which I've done more than once. So that's the first thing. The second thing is labor is high relative to some other areas. I mean, when you're in these kind of markets, cost of living's higher, and labor's higher. However, there are a lot of things that aren't necessarily similar. One of them is access to talent is a lot easier in an area like this with the kind of public transport we have, the kind of density. We've got blocks around here that have over 90,000 people per square mile, kind of density. So the access to talent's actually different. So one of the things that we can look at is what is the kind of performance on a sales per labor hour basis or just performance basis that you can find when you have high levels of talent that's maybe paid more, but also that the bar is set a little bit higher. How does that work? And we've been able to drive very strong labor efficiencies in some of these markets in terms of sales per labor hour. So you get a little bit of balance. It's not just taking the same legions of people you might expect in a similar volume store if you were in a lower cost labor market and transplanting them. You can be more judicious and you can be more successful in recruiting, frankly, just because of where you are. It's not because you're smarter or better, but there's just a pool of people. So that gets plugged into the model too. And that's based on real performance of real stores in these kind of environments. There's not many of them. That's part of the reason this kind of thing gets overlooked. But we literally went in and I scheduled out entire departments, and Kevin scheduled out all the prepared foods. We actually built this like a mock store, not here's an industry average. We said, what is this store going to attain? And that made a difference in this urban environment, fuels a lot of those distinctions. There's also differences in general expectations and customer behavior in terms of what kind of things they're buying, what kind of average basket you're dealing with, what kind of range you have. So all that got plugged into, and again, rooted in real world experience.
So with Dan on the team, we dove in and did the work. We kind of used it, the metaphor of the sausage making. It's Chicago, right? So everybody on the team brought forth their work. Carla brought the store design. Kevin brought his thoughts about the deli. Dan brought his thoughts about the programming and the operational and the category mix. And we threw them all out on the table. The whole team kind of wrestled with them a little bit, tested each other's ideas. We'd go back and refine stuff, and then we'd integrate what we thought was going to work. And we went through this process multiple times over that 4-week period that we had to really figure out what it was going to take to make Chicago Market successful in this location. And I'm happy to say that at the end of the day, we came back with a yes, it is possible to have not just feasible, but you guys have an opportunity to have a very successful flagship store at this location because of that urban density. So we were happy to come back to Chicago Market and tell them, yeah, there's an opportunity here. We're going to talk you through now some of the solutions that we came up with to help them navigate their challenges.
Yeah, and there are a myriad challenges here. I mean, we're talking about a historic building that was not designed as a grocery store. This is not a strip mall situation or just an empty shell. So there's all sorts of challenges that you don't always encounter when you're establishing a new food co-op. For example, is there a receiving dock? No, there's not. Is there really any credible way to put one around behind the store or something that you'd normally do? Nope, it's not going to happen. Is the shell really laid out in a way that you can transplant a standard design? It is not. Uh, we have, for example, an architectural feature that is a grand staircase to nowhere. Can we remove that feature that is a space eating kind of thing? No, we can't. So those kind of challenges are there, and that extends to the facade, because the exterior of the building is of critical importance to several agencies, like historical preservation folks. So we're going to have to work within a different set of parameters than we might normally have, the kind of freedoms you expect when you're doing store design. So that's some of the things that we're going to talk through here. All right, let's move on. All right, so in terms of receiving, as noted, there's not really a traditional loading dock or zone. However, it is entirely possible by locating some receiving access on the frontage of the building to receive. And in fact, when I was in Seattle, for example, we didn't really have a true loading dock either, and large trucks would park in the street and roll stuff up the hill and into the warehouse. So this is, you guys that live in cities or visit cities, you know how it is. There aren't those kind of amenities for a lot of retailers. So it's not something that's insurmountable. It's commonly addressed. So one of the things that I would consider unacceptable in, let's say we're in that mid-sized city, we can flex here. Park Slope in Brooklyn deals with, I think their sales are approaching 60 million or so a year, and they don't really have that kind of facility. They're just stopping the road and rolling stuff in. So we could certainly find solutions just like many other people have. One of the things that's critical is that we preserve that historic facade when we do this. And so we can't necessarily do everything we want to do with the loading dock, but we can make it functional. And just with good lifts and racking and everything, we'll be just fine at getting things in efficiently and distributing them. Did require a new door. That is going to require some modification to the facade. So we did have to talk that through and get approvals, and we'll have to preserve material. So in the event we ever leave, it can be restored to its other condition. But in general, we have a satisfactory solution that we believe will work. And I think we'll have to pay something on the order of $4,000 or $5,000 a year in fees just to assure the access we need from the city. So that's something that can be handled. Let's move to the next piece. Okay, customer traffic flow. So the original design, and one of the things that precipitated this sense that this can't work, I think there were some design considerations that were really important to some folks that were incorporated, and there was an attempt to do the natural thing, which is to use the main grand entrance. And what that did was it really created a situation where you don't really have a true flow. A really good store design, you always have a sense of flow, where your customers go, how they navigate, that plays on normal human tendencies and ergonomics and just, logistical sensibility, and what draws the eye, what feels comfortable. And this particular design lacked that. And the biggest concern for us when we got a hold of this was the fact that you had check stands in two areas of the store. And given our projected sales volume and the economics, this does two things. One, it eats up a lot of space that is already going to be under pressure given the shape and design of the store. So we need more retail environment, not more check stand environment. The second thing that it did is it harmed service and security. So we know that those things compromise sales potential as well, partly because you have to have more staff in more places, and partly because you really end up with a lack of ease of controls, the ability to respond quickly to requests. And so this was a major concern. There's cross streaming, if you guys are familiar with store design, where people are maybe in a different flow coming at cross purposes. And this just really doesn't make for a great environment. So we'll move to the next piece. Site plan. So what is it about the site plan? Just overall, the first big thing you'll see here is that there was some, there's a lack of flow still in the plan. We do try by removing some, if you remove some checks since the end, you might be able to consolidate pedestrian traffic. You might be able to streamline flow and that sort of thing, but that's going to require completely jettisoning most of what's in this plan. For example, if we were to try to move product from the warehouse into this interior of the store, there's no comfortable way to do that. And even I would go so far as to say it may be a safety problem in some ways, the way this is set up from the old plan. So the split ingress egress is a major problem for that reason. And also it creates confusion. So if I am not sure exactly where to go, where to check out, how to go in and out, because there's multiple ways in and out, that's difficult for staff, that's difficult for customers. And so we felt like that could be remedied. Let's go to the next one, because I think this will make more clear what we're doing. So the customer traffic flow that we've established by putting another ingress point on the side of the building, which would, obviously require a variance from the historical office, did a couple of things. One, it gives you a relatively common starting point for people, whether they're pedestrians, which we've heard maybe 75% of shoppers, we'll see, and the folks that are using our parking area, which I think will be used a lot. For example, in Seattle, we had 38 spaces, which is fewer than this site has. And that lot oftentimes have people circling. So I don't think just because 75% may come from pedestrian traffic doesn't mean that the lot won't be full. This only has about 50 spaces. So there'll still be a lot of traffic coming and going there. Anyway, so what you do here is you consolidate the front end services, which is going to make them more effective at responding to each other as they're trying to support each other, and being able to acknowledge people, greet people, and also for security purposes. This really pushes in and out flow to an area where we can get a handle on what's happening. And this was just proof of concept. We've since modified this somewhat, but what we really did here is say we can solve the flow problem, we can solve the safety and logistical problems, and we can really solve the service and security problems, and we did that. So let's move on to the next. Okay, new Broadway customer entrance. So that's the real feature that made all that possible. Again, this is historic facade, and so that was something that was more of an ask. It's not something we could just dictate. It did get tentative approval here, assuming we go ahead and build it. But the historic folks seem to like what we did. They understand why, but it's not something you would normally do if you were designing a building from scratch. It's still not on the street corner, the intersection. So people will have to come around the building from the transit station, but it's a reasonable cost benefit. And I think that's the thing that we're really looking at is not letting ideal get in the way of what's functional and works. And you can see also there's one window that we had to obscure. And this is something that was a real problem from the historical preservation perspective. So a solution we had to help maybe get a little bit of leverage for this one piece was to say we're committed to putting in material that actually tells the story of the building, the neighborhood, and if the idea is historical preservation and the idea is that people can appreciate this, this is a great way for us to put some material there that makes that stuff really come to life and make more sense to people who otherwise just say, well, what an interesting place to have a grocery store. And so that actually was really helpful. So on the next slide, you'll see at the top what it says here, 8 weeks. So, store design can take a while. But we ripped through this in under 2 months, and really it was substantially done even in shorter than that 8 weeks. I think this was largely because I know it was because we had a diverse array of talent and experience on our team. We had people who really understood how a store like this would operate. So it's sort of like if you were designing products for people, the end user experience. You want to know what's the person who's buying it going to do with it and what's their experience, not what's my experience back at the test lab and what do I think about it. How are real people going to use it in a real environment? And so having folks that have deep experience in very similar type of situations contribute to the plan meant that we've seen this movie before, so that it actually accelerated the progress and being able to work with each other instead of being siloed. We had everybody in a very collaborative kind of system, so that as we're building programming, we're building pro forma, we're building site plan, all that could flow together really seamlessly. You'll see in the plan a couple of things of interest, just in case you want to get oriented. So you look at the new entrance we said, so there's a little arrow pointing out. That's where everybody's coming and going from the pedestrian side, and the green is the produce. So we really want people to enter right into our strong suit, because given the kind of dense urban environment we have, we know produce is going to be really on people's minds in a very strong way. People tend to shop fresh, and frequent. And so this is something where, and we also know it's a place where we can really express our values and we can engage the market very successfully given the competitive environment. So it really makes sense that produce leads and that it's strong. And then you flow into standard grocery gondolas, and we've oriented those in such a way that it really maximizes natural light flow and visibility from the different parts of the street and the intersection. And that's really important because we're so limited on what we can do for signage because of the historic building. So we can't just put up some big neon sign right on the side or whatnot. We need people to be able to see a grocery store as much as possible. So actually giving up the window space it was a smart move, I believe, because it brings us into the environment. It kind of integrates us into the area, but it also gives us great line of sight. Wellness is the little light blue thing over in the corner where the old entrance was. We're using that as an emergency exit, not as a main coming and going spot. So we'll have to have some messaging and things there that help people understand where to go, but that's solvable. I've dealt with alternative entrance stuff in Seattle where we had a exit only spot that we had to have that was, it's not dissimilar to something I've had to endure previously. And then of course the refrigeration, the blue, we've got a backloading walk-in. In the current iteration, we've kind of grown that a little bit, but for our purposes today, that's where everything's going. And that's why that the window is blocked out. And really there's not an easy way to handle that service anywhere else. If we tried to make everything just front loading cases and put a walk-in somewhere else deeper in the store, we just exacerbate the problems that come from having a pretty bustling, what we expect to be a bustling market with some little tight spots and having to go the whole length of this weird Star Destroyer shape, for lack of a better term. If you've seen Star Wars, you know what I mean. It's kind of got that look to it. So it's really important to us for labor control and logistics and customer service and safety that we're able to consolidate stuff for those high turnover perishables somewhere deeper into the zone where they're going to be. So that's why the window thing had to happen, just in case you're wondering. And then you move along and you see in the red, you have meat and seafood type of department. We originally had a lot of people had a charge about we must have a butcher. Well, the reality is that will drive your costs way up, and I'm not so sure that we really will have the volume to support that or the space. I mean, if you're really going to do butchering and things, that has a need for space consideration. And so we're saying, out of all the things we can have, it's just like any kind of curve. Like, where's the maximum, local maximum, not the ultimate, driving some other thing, but the balance of cost and benefit is best when we leverage the other kind of players in town. So Chicago is a city with plenty of people that specialize in meats and seafood and distribution and preparation, and they're very good at it. So there's no sense for us to take on the cost and expense of trying to deal with that inside. So we may cut some primals, we'll do some grinding, but largely that service is one of the gives that we had to make this viable. Sometimes you may have your heart set on something, but you really have to ask whether or not it is part of a successful vision. In this case, backing down that expectation a little bit is important. And then you have Orange for deli services. It's not the biggest kitchen in the world, but it's not the smallest. It's substantially more space than we had at the site in Capitol Hill in Seattle. And that store again was, at the time I left, we were doing about almost 26.5 million out of that site with similar square footage to this store, but we had a food service that was actually substantially more limited than this. So I'm quite confident this can handle the volume we're looking at. And I think just a shout out to Kevin O'Donnell. He really knows what he's doing. He's got a deep experience in prepared foods and hospitality and operations. And I think having him on the team and Carla really give us a lot of confidence with what's going on there. And it certainly matched up pretty well with the kind of things I've seen in food co-ops over the year. I don't know, visited probably at this point worldwide. I've been in over 200 stores and really put time into trying to figure out what's going on. So it's not I mean co-ops, not other stores. And this isn't unusual. One of the solves there too that we're looking at is maybe some self-purchasing kiosks, so we can streamline the point of sale issue there for ordering and things, but we'll get to that later. And then of course you come around, you see the giant staircase, which is a huge feature that's in the way, and there's nothing we can really do to move it. So we're saying, how can we leverage it? Is it going to be a mixed media kind of art piece that tells our story? Are we going to have a screen that we can project to and that we can rotate things through that communicate valuable information? Might we use the stairs like an amphitheater so we can bring in groups of school kids on occasion and use that as a space to speak to them because we really don't have space for a large meeting room? We're not totally set on what can happen there, but the feature is going to be turned into a strength in any way we can, as opposed to just trying to live with an anomaly. And of course, then you've got a small seating area, the restrooms, break room. We won't get into too much store detail, but you get the basic flow. The one place I want to mention is where you go to get in and out of the parking lot. So you can see back there, we've retained that ingress egress point, which I think is actually really good. And it's a very nice parking lot. We've got pervious pavers and everything else. You'll also notice that there is a little jut out for the walk-ins that goes into that space. So we've one of the things that's not a historic facade. So we actually have the capacity to grow our usable square footage in some limited instances. And we'll look and see what other ways we might do that. I also will note that the hatch marks you see up in the upper corner near the word preliminary, that's where the train station lets out into the street so people can get in and out. So up in the little hash marks, yeah. So anyway, one other piece of information that'll help you get oriented is down at the little narrow tip is where that the ingress egress is to the parking area. Okay, that gets you a little oriented. We're not really a design day today, but it helps you see what we're dealing with. We did that really fast. Market and business viability. So a couple of things about this. One, we're looking at the assumptions that went into the market study to begin with, as we're working on pro forma, et cetera. First, we know that the market study was, from 2017. So there's got to be a little bit of, when is this store likely to open, and make adjustments until an updated study can happen. Are there any things that have shifted in the market that we need to be aware of, short of having a new study? And so we really looked at what changes have happened, what changes are projected, how does inflation look, and we just made those kind of basic adjustments. But there's also some pieces in there that I don't think we're 100% baked in. And that is, it was really built on a gravity model, which is fine, and it gets you reasonable results. But if we're going to take a market study and we're going to discount it pretty heavily in order to satisfy lenders that we have a reasonable pro forma, just how far we're going to discount that and what kind of overrun allowances and everything else we need to build in may have some play based on what we think is really going to happen here. This area has enormous density. And it also has, when we use that term psychographics, of people's behaviors, activities. If you're seeing active people, am I seeing yoga studios? Am I seeing joggers? Do I have reason to believe there's a lot of 2-income, no children households? There's certain things that play to different markets, like the one that we need to build to make the economics work here. And we see all those things in spades. So just simply having income and population data, I think gives you a very conservative estimate of what's possible. So that's the first thing I'd say, is that just in my experience, I think there's reason to believe this particular market can overshoot the study. Now, we didn't build the pro forma to overshoot it. We built it conservatively and we discounted the sales, but it's one of those things that we were mindful of. When we looked at the labor and margins that were required to make it work, so we start out with, what's sort of the break point? What kind of margin minus labor do you have to generate on these sales in order to make this thing go? That's the first thing, because it has to match that. And so we started with that and just and saw what kind of pool was available. And at the same time, we looked at what kind of hours of operation were likely. What's it really going to take to make the coverage? What kind of cross training can you expect? What kind of services can you outsource, given the fact that we are where we are? Like, is there some of the accounting that can outsource? Is IT, how much of that can you outsource? So we're trying to figure out exactly what's the minimum you could get away with, and build from there towards what would be really awesome. And we plugged all that stuff in real schedules with real projected wages and benefits, and that helped guide the programming that was needed to support that too. Normally, that sort of stuff happens later, but given the fact that we've got a thing that doesn't fit, I mean, it's a strange building. It's in a market that is atypical. It's not easy to just transplant industry averages from Cometrics or anything into here. So we really had to think through every little piece and say, given what we've got to do to satisfy a lender in terms of discounted off the market study, what would work? And as it turns out, we were able to show that even with a pretty substantial discounting, even with high labor on a average wage basis, that we were able to become profitable in very reasonable time. Our EBITDA, everything was going to support solvency, liquidity, and earnings that were needed to make this a really successful project. If we had just plugged in gross level assumptions, we wouldn't have seen that viability. It would have looked pretty indecisive or negative. So I think that's an important point, that especially the more distinctive a site and the surrounding community context becomes, the more you really need to drill down and start imagining, what a real store is going to do. And I went so far as to map out all the merchandising, just like I was just building the thing. Like, how many feet of cereal are there? How's this? Everything's laid out that way. Kevin's looking at all the program. What are we serving? And what does it really look like to work in that environment? We went to a level of detail that usually comes a lot later. So I just want to put that out there. Let's see. So programming. So as we're developing this, it's particularly important, I think, that we had Kevin in the mix on this, because delis are potentially a sinkhole. Like, if you don't get prepared foods right, it can become a cash inferno. You know, it's really the kind of thing where the stakes are high. It can also become a really great feature. But the difference in those two things are sometimes really small details even. So having someone that was really experienced and that could really just say, here, I'm building the menus. I'm building storage that will support those menus. I am writing out actual schedules with projected wages, and just draw through that was really critical. And I did that kind of work for all the other departments. And as we develop the mix, we're also playing off of with the other team members. What does the design support? You know, Carla shows where here's what we can do here or not. You know, can we get more end caps? Can we improve the flow? So we're all playing together at different times. You know, what does Kay and Jacqueline have to say about what'll go in this market, or what people's, you know, from plenty of other data gathering about the market, what have they said? And I think at the end of the day, we were able to test reasonably against real data how the high margin kind of environment might work with a mix. That doesn't mean all high prices. We still have a basics program. We still have community discount programs so that low income folks can access the store reasonably. All those things exist. It's not a high price store, but the mix and the department weight give us the ability to juice up the margins without destroying our price image or without becoming inaccessible. Been able to pull that off in other stores in the same way and achieve margins in excess of 40 overall in those situations. And so I know it can happen, but we plugged it through, tested it. We worked on the category management. We worked on every little piece of this. Like it was almost like it's ready to pop in and open at this level. Now that doesn't mean we wouldn't do work later. It just means that we didn't want to say, well, you know, we'll just have so many grocery gondolas and plug in a grocery number. I wanted to see exactly how things would play out at a detailed level. So we know exactly how much bulk there's going to be.
And I think the key point for all of us, Dan, sorry to jump in here, but one key point I think was that we were, this isn't a situation where we could just plant in the usual co-op expectations. We really had to develop and design a unique solution for this unique site at this exact, you know, the unique triangular shape, but also, you know, everything you've mentioned about the consumers and the different needs and motivations that consumers have in an urban environment like this. So that was kind of some of the specifics. On the other side, we also worked incredibly closely with the board. As we said, the board was really ready to stand back and let us come in and make recommendations on what was going to work in this site. They were at a no-go decision point, which is always a challenging moment for food co-ops. So we were able to help to support them through that by keeping them updated weekly on our progress and how we thought things were heading, having ad hoc meetings if anything popped up where we needed more information. And I have to say the board was excellent. We just had incredibly accessible board members. We were able to work really closely and really tightly with them. We were going to give kind of a progress report midway through where we were just starting to see glimmers that this might be feasible at a monthly board meeting. And suddenly it turns out there were about 50 owners planning to show up to get updated. So it actually ended up being more of an owner session that I think helped to kind of reignite some excitement and some sense of possibility for Chicago market. Our final report was way more comprehensive than they expected because we included all the things Dan just talked about, not just a labor percentage to aim for in the pro forma, but detailed labor plans that listed positions and salaries and had specific budgets for multiple years. And to even further support the excitement that was growing once this seemed to be feasible, JQ was also able to participate in their annual meeting just shortly after the report came out to help the owners understand the implications and the challenges that would be ahead of them if they decided to move forward. One of the things, so operationally, with the right type of store design product mix, we knew a co-op was going to be feasible in this location, but there were two kind of big caveats. It's, you know, co-ops don't just happen by magic. They take a lot of hard work. And the first big caveat that we had for Chicago Market was they had to get the leadership right. This is the actual slide I put in the final report out to the board, saying that you guys have a potential here for a world-class co-op. You're in a world-class food city, but to pull this off, this is a really kind of challenging, complex store design that you have to get exactly right. And to pull it off, you're going to need someone who's highly and deeply experienced. At the time, we saw Dan's energy and excitement about the project growing, and we were hoping and wishing and praying that he might be interested in being the GM here. But we knew in working with Dan and seeing his expertise and deep understanding of how these urban dense environment stores work, that we needed someone like him to lead the charge on getting this store happening. So we gave them some guidelines for hiring, and they as a board were willing, we thought, and we knew, to do what was needed to land the type of talent. And being in a world-class city like Chicago, there was a chance they could actually land an experienced manager to help realize this vision. But that was absolutely key. Without the right leader at the helm, this project would not be viable. I know all of y'all spent yesterday talking about capital, and capital is going to be a challenge as well. Chicago's an expensive city. There's lots of things to take into account. This is a historic preservation building, and this was going to take a chunk of change to get going. But we did find a viable sourcing plan. It would require the co-op to have very strong and aggressive owner growth. They had about 1,800 members already. They'd been organizing for a very long time. Some of those early owners had kind of given up faith, thinking the co-op was never going to open, so we needed to reignite them. But they also had to grow ownership and pretty much double it between now and opening. We told them their ownership target needed to be about 3,500 people, which would probably be unachievable for some co-ops in towns like Fargo. But in a place like Chicago, again, that urban density, the people are there. It's just a matter of connecting with them and getting the message out. They were going to have a big capital campaign. So we planned for that in a couple different phases, and that's still ahead of them. But one of the things that made us think this was viable, in addition to those landlord concessions that helped out, but there is tax incentive financing opportunities in the city of Chicago. And somebody on their board knew that program intimately, inside and out. And they had the capacity and the skill to make sure that the application was absolutely solid and would sail through that process. And the team had built the political connections, and being in this iconic building from the CTA, they'd done their groundwork and kind of laid the foundations for if this TIF application goes in. Of course, nothing's final till it's final, but they actually had a really good chance of landing some significant funding from this city program in Chicago. So all of those things together, if the co-op could rise to the challenge of hitting those membership targets, if they nailed their capital campaign, we thought this project was doable. So to summarize then and pull out some of the key learnings and why we're here today talking about the shift and what was unique and different about this project, here's some of the takeaways we'd love you to take with you. Dan?
Yeah, so one of the things that's really important to note is you can actually move really quickly if you get the right people at the table and you empower them. So that's one of the things that was really great here, as Kay mentioned with the board. They're willing to say, look, we're willing to see what do you guys think can work? Is there anything that you can do with the site? So we were given a relatively free hand. Certainly you want to have folks that are responsive to your values and what your owners want. And that was certainly there. But you always have the decision as a board, you always have the power. So it's actually a pretty safe thing to say, let's see what these experts can come up with if we give them some space. And I think that that helped us to really move in a quick way. And also it's important not to let the ideal prevent the implementation of the effective, especially when you're dealing with an odd space. And so, well, but I would like it to be this way. Well, if there's not really a good path there, you just have to say, how can I make something work? And the reason that's important in some cases, especially in these kind of dense urban environments, is you can't always get the exact site within the location that you want. We had such a wonderful location. There's going to be some compromises with site, but the strengths of this one were so strong that it was worth um, having those compromises, and we were given the latitude to do that. You may want to ask yourself in deciding those kind of things, will customers care? If it's an outstanding customer experience, some things that aren't ideal behind the scenes can be managed. The real thing is it is a retail environment. So the very first order of business is, what is it that the customers care about most? And if they're really happy and the store is making good income, good money, the other things are solvable. But if their experience isn't great, none of the other stuff's going to matter. So we just kind of started with that. Yeah. Oh, and the market business viability side. Oh boy. So it's important to understand wherever you're at, there's going to be some operational impacts based on context, what people like, what they don't, what they tend to do. People don't always just change their behaviors radically because you're there. You're going to have to adapt to them. In this case, dense urban model is something where you have to look at other dense urban analogs to understand how do people behave when you have a site with similar characteristics, and seeking out stores that are in environments that are more similar to you and seeing how they're adapting to things can be really important, or getting people that have the perspective. The other piece of this that you see on bullet 2 is that you see that there are some unique solutions, that you've got some of that deriving from the fact that it is a world-class food city, which means we have access to some goods and services at maybe an abnormally high level. But you also, in order to steer that kind of environment, you do need to have high level talent. So just saying, well, someone's, you know, this is their first management job, or they're not familiar with or aligned terribly well with the co-op values, or they've done retail but not grocery. Those kind of things just aren't going to work. The stakes are too high, and the thing has to be too finely tuned. So you have to be able to commit to what it takes to get people that are capable of pulling it off. Talent is a critical piece, and I'm not saying that because I'm in this role, but this is something that moves a little faster, and where the outcomes. It's kind of like if you were driving a really fast race car versus like you're commuting around in your Corolla. Like if you've got a really high performance car, little corrections can have a lot bigger impact on your outcomes. And I think this is the kind of situation you have when you've got something that is so unusual in so many ways. So anyway, I'll just leave you with that part. It's also the last piece of that. Location and site need to drive design and programming, not the other way around. You can't just transplant, this, baboon heart into a great white shark and expect it to live. It's like this is a different element. So I couldn't say, wow, what's really working down at Common Ground, which is an awesome co-op. You could just take that store and stick it right here, and it's going to be great. Well, not necessarily. We have to really take account of what our shoppers look like and what our community looks like, and how the diversity of people impacts it, how that the modes of transport impacts it, how their attitudes about food are different. And so we're starting from that. So we have more of a pull than a push philosophy. And that's really important here. Let's see. Next up. Mm-hmm.
The board, as I said, we were asked to come in at a unique moment in this co-op's development. They were at a no-go decision point, yes or no. They were ready to step back and let our team do the work, and they were ready to let go of some of their strongly held, we must have this or we must have that. They were open to our input and expertise. And the project was at this unique moment where we could step in, and the site was there. We were able to flesh out all the equipment specs and get that number plugged into the pro forma and do a deep testing and analysis of the pro forma and give them something that we knew would actually work, and that wasn't just a kind of preliminary thoughts, but actually had the labor budgets and the sales projections and the category management and all of those pieces per department, labor targets and margins figured out to support the information that was in the pro forma. Because again, the urban markets are different, margins are very different. A typical co-op lender used to the typical co-op pro forma is going to look at this and go, what's up with that? That's not what I'm used to seeing. And we knew we needed to be able to defend that, and that Chicago market would need that backup data to be successful with closing their lending package. So that was kind of the project that we delivered. We were excited at the end of the project to bring some good news back to this co-op, that there was a viable path forward. They could enter into negotiations with their landlord and move forward with some additional concessions and a vision for their store that actually worked. So since this project wrapped up at the end of April or the end of August last year, some exciting things have happened for Chicago market, and I'll let Dan tell you about those.
So it is a really cool story. We had a co-op that was at a point where they were at a real crossroads and ready to potentially walk away from this site. Potentially, that may lead to the co-op losing its momentum entirely if that happens. So it was a pretty big set of decision points. Through the process that we all took on together, we were able to show that there was a path forward. And since then, I think ownership is re-energized, growing. We have almost 2,000 owners right now, and that's really pretty great for this stage. I mean, for those of you that are building co-ops in your own area, that number is not something to take lightly, considering we're not even near construction at this point. That's awesome. And I've talked to people personally who had sort of given up, or they thought they just threw their money away maybe, and now they're excited again and they're optimistic. So it can't be understated just how much of an impact having a light at the end of the tunnel and being able to see that awesome vision that people had been crafting for so long can really happen, and that there's something material to prove it. Historical approvals, all the design work we did, that stuff we did in 8 weeks, solved multiple hangups. There were things that could have just flatlined the project or would have led to being dismissed out of hand, and those things got resolved even in that short time frame. Which is pretty amazing too, considering how intricate this is. A TIF funding package is submitted. I will say that the word is that they're pretty high on our project, and we'll see how that goes. But I think we're in pretty good shape, and our board does have some folks that are ultra talented and knowledgeable, and that's certainly helpful. But it's also true that the strength of the project is something that's speaking to them too. And of course, they hired me, which I think is great. That wasn't my purpose getting involved. I was just Kay and Jacqueline had called and asked if I'd be interested in helping out, and I'd assume that was about what it would be. But one of the things that I see is the strength of this project's real, and the vision, I think, is really strong and rooted in cooperative principles. So it wasn't a super hard sell to get me to a world-class city that really is in desperate need to see a greater presence of cooperative economy in their grocery system. This is the kind of thing that really gets me excited. So I'm here. And of course, there's shops. So we have, many of you attended that session. We have a way to retail to get money to local producers, artisans, farmers, and get some energy into our co-op. So getting people used to buying with us. That program is amazing. If you haven't seen that piece of the conference, I suggest you go back and look at the video. And our farmers market, now we just completed 2 weeks, so our third week coming up on Wednesday. It's been a great success. It feels like it's been there for years. I mean, it's just amazing how This the selection of vendors, the energy they're bringing, and the volunteer group we have. We've had more volunteers come out of the woodwork than we can handle. So we're like trying to put people on standby and things like that. It's just amazing energy, and our volunteer corps is just remarkable. But anyway, that sort of energy and stuff is building towards, at really an opening, where as before it was, maybe we abandon it. It's just a completely different reality.
And that's been incredibly exciting to watch. Literally a year ago, they were getting ready to walk away from the site, and they're back, and they're going to be doing, I think, really amazing things in Chicago. So keep your eye on Chicago market. There's really good stuff happening there. That's the end of our presentation. We want to hear from you guys. What questions do you have? We all know the questions are the best part, and I think I have the ability to allow people to talk if you raise your hand, or if you put a question into the Zoom chat. So I will just throw it in there so you can see that. And what questions do you have? I do see Kevin O'Donnell's with us. He was again part of our team. Chicago Market called this the Firebrand project, but in reality, we were a multi-organizational group with Carla from Retail Planet and Kevin O'Donnell from Seven Roots and JQ from FCI, all coming together to work on this. So any questions out there? Go ahead and raise your hand or drop something in the chat. And again, the Zoom chat, not the Pathable chat.
Yeah, see if we've got any in there.
I'm not seeing any questions. So Kevin, I'm gonna put you on. Is there anything we missed from your perspective that you'd like to share?
Let's see. Let's see someone there.
I might have put him on the spot. Oh.
I don't know if the function there is coming through. I'm seeing some people's stuff show up in chat, so feel free to ask anything. And even if it's not specific to the presentation, but you're just curious about anything, you've got open season with us.
Thank you for the feedback, Tony. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah.
Kevin, you're still open if you'd like to chime in.
Can you hear me now, Kay?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Yeah,
Great.
there we go.
Great. It was just a matter of my computer was blocking the sound. But yeah, I have to say that, from my perspective, having the team support and talent to actually push this project along a timeline and have somebody who is really good at holding everybody accountable to that timeline was really a huge difference maker. Kay was the perfect project manager here, and working with Dan, it was a pleasure. We were on the same page all the time, and it was really unique. And I also think it shows that cross-cutting talents can make a difference sometimes, especially in a case like this. And it was a beautiful project to work on.
Cool. Thanks, Kevin. I see some other questions coming in, so I'm going to jump to those now. A couple things. First of all, thank you. That's Kevin's nice way of saying I'm going to run you down and make sure all your work gets done on time, but truly was not a problem with this team. It was a joy to work with everyone. Work was done on time. And I think when you give people freedom to operate at the top of their expertise, which is what we needed, you get some really interesting results. And we had a great dynamic on the team. Dan, I'm going to throw some questions your way. Let's see. So what might a study like what you just described cost? Did I miss that? I'll be really transparent here. We did this tight turnaround in 8 weeks for about $20,000. And yeah, so that was about the cost of all the different experts that we brought together working on that timeline. And keep in mind, at the end of the day, they had their preliminary store design drawings. They had their preliminary equipment list with potential costs. So we were able to plug in an equipment amount into our pro forma. And then we had that super deeply developed pro forma with not just the numbers in the pro forma, but also all the supporting documentation and labor margins, and labor targets and margins and all of that in there. Dan, I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but this is kind of co-op historical. So how many different businesses submitted RFPs for the building site? I know that was way before your time, so I'm not even sure if you know.
Yeah. I don't have that information. I know there were other folks that wanted in. But one of the things that was important is that we were the kind of business that was seen as community enriching and not just a retailer or a business looking for a home and that thought the building was great or they could leverage it. But really, I think our status as a cooperative that's really community focused and that is deeply rooted in a set of values that are community enriching was really the part of the deciding factor, and the fact that the kind of food retail we do is not as common. There's really not, other than in Aldi's, and some small grocers. You have to go out a little ways if you were in one of those housing units close by before you really get to a great retail environment. So I think it all played well, but I don't know the exact number, and I'm not sure they ever disclose all of those because some of that may be held closer to the chest.
Yeah, it was definitely a unique process to get a site, and one that I hadn't seen a co-op go through before. We got a couple hands raised. Scott, I'm going to unmute you right now. You can go ahead. Scott Bricks, what's your question?
Hi, yeah, I heard you mention you had an army of volunteers, and something that I'm trying to deal with currently. We're at the Food Shed Co-op just west of you out in McHenry County, and we need an army of volunteers. So I just picked up on that comment. I just wondered what you could say about how you herd cats or manage volunteers.
Sure. Well, we've got sorry. We've got several board members that are really adept at managing human capital, and they've been at it for a while. In the thing I mentioned, a lot of it's the strength of just the appeal of the farmers market, and this was a genius move. I think was, there's a lot of things you have where maybe you get some volunteers, maybe you don't, but a farmer's market's exciting. We're talking about something that really speaks to a lot of the core values, and it speaks to a lot of it's fun to be part of, frankly. I mean, if you working with farmers and producers and they're producing things you like and you love to meet them, and people love to be a part of that. It's that's the kind of thing that's easy. So I'd say if you really want to get excitement with volunteers, you find things that are really compelling and fun. It's going to be harder to draw people for sometimes the less sexy work, but for a farmer's market, you can sure get them in there, and that can be a good hook. So if you've got a project that's really exciting, that may help you build up a list of people that are interested in helping. But that was the magic there. I think it's the same thing with shop. I think that's compelling enough that you don't have a problem having people to participate. We'll see if we have as great of a response as we're doing phone banking and things like that. But I think that's really the secret there. Is just pick a few things that are in line with your mission and that are fun, and I think you'll see people come out.
Excellent. JQ, I think you had your hand up there. Do you have a comment or a question?
I was just a second going to piggyback on what Dan said earlier, and I really want to point this out to startups that active project management is such a make or break, and I really think a lot of startups don't know this and don't see it. Either they've never seen master level project management, or just don't understand what it could do, and to pay for it. So I just have to say, yeah, so I just want to say how much that had to do with, all of us as individual experts participating, and that was all great, but having someone come in and project manage a specific time, specific project within your work. The board basically does its own project management, and you know what that's like. And I don't think it's fair to turn over all the project management of the entire development of the co-op to someone else too early on. I've seen that backfire in some ways and the board become disempowered. But in specific projects like this, like working through feasibility, or when you get to the build out stage, effective project management is just make or break. I can't stress enough what that can do. And I think a lot of times I see, completely understandably, I've been running projects on tight budgets before, I know where you're at, but I see this unwillingness to invest in project management. We can just do that ourselves, quote unquote. And whatever field you're in, you've met somebody who's like said, oh, we could just do that ourselves. And they don't really understand what can bring to it. I just want to be clear, this is a place that a lot of us can, on a scale of 1 to 10, project manage to a 5 or 6, and you don't, and then you see a 9 or a 10 and what it can do, and the investment is just really worth it. That's what I wanted to say.
Yep.
Oh, great, thanks.
Yep.
JQ was on our team. Any other high points from your experience working on this project, or any other learnings you want to really distill for food co-ops? I think the one piece is, the work we did typically takes years for a startup co-op to do. And some of it's done consecutively, some of it's done concurrently, but to be able to move through the whole store design process and the whole feasibility in 8 weeks is, I think, really the shift that occurred in this project. Your thoughts, JQ?
Yeah, I would say that was the unusual piece, and the really kind of intriguing, exciting thing that happened there is, certain things had to be in place. There was already, a strong market study, from a competent provider. There was a preliminary pro forma already, but with those pieces in place, it was really incredible to see what a team could do. Again, I'm not trying to sell anything because I volunteered on this project. But what I see for startups that really excited me was that with a few pieces in place of preliminary feasibility work and board understanding of what feasibility entails and what needs to be seen, so they can question and push back and ask the right questions on the process, you're balancing $20,000 across from what legitimately I've seen take 1.5 to 2 years when kind of separately project managed by the startup in bits and bobs. So it was really intriguing to watch how fast that went, how accurate and how in depth it was, and intriguing to think what this could mean for our startups at the right part, had to bring in something similar at the right point in our feasibility work. My only caution would be is I would not have someone from the outside do it if you don't have a market study yet, if you haven't ever looked at a pro forma and started to understand what that might entail. I think you need you need those tools, but you also need some preliminary understanding of a board of what you're trying to accomplish. It is wonderful to trust experts, and I think we should trust the experts we bring in, and we should vet them before we bring them in. But it's also your job to then be, vetting their work and asking the right questions. And I think that happens when you're, if you're part of the way into the feasibility process and have educated yourself enough, this kind of process could possibly be really incredible for a startup.
Yeah, and I think key point there, the board was incredibly responsive. They had all the information ready for us so we could dive in from day one. And they were part of the success of this, absolutely. Let's see, Vivian, we'll go to you next, and then Scott, I think your hand is still up. So Vivian, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you now. What's your question or comment? And Vivian, I'll give you just another moment. Hopefully it's just a technical issue there. All right, I believe your mic is open. You're welcome to put something into the chat as well. We might be having a technical issue. Scott, I'll go ahead and bring you back as well. If you have an additional question, I'm not sure if your hand was still up from last time.
Yeah, I just failed to lower my hand, so I don't have any additional.
Okay, sounds good. All right, Dan, any last words or last thoughts?
Sure, there's a few. One thing that you may hear from people, they say, well, it's why is it different, or it's not. I would say this. Here's an example that probably tells the tale the best. Is Park Slope Food Co-op. If you're familiar with them, that's a food co-op in Brooklyn, hyper dense area, and of course that's all member work almost. They have a very small staff overall, and they're churning out, like I say, near 60 million in sales a year out of this little store that doesn't really have much facility. If you tried to transplant that model and stick it in just, kind of any town USA, the odds of its success would be near zero. I mean, that's not something that translates outside of some of the special conditions that hyper dense urbanism can provide. And so it really is a different animal than what we're used to in food co-ops. You could look at some of the things that have been done in other co-ops, but that one probably gives you a pretty good clue that things are different, right? So there are some real world examples that prove our point. It's not just that we feel special, because it's here. It's just a different environment, and it's not really the kind of place where food co-ops have tended to start up at scale. That's a thing that's really happening here that's different too, is this is a co-op that's starting up at scale in that density. Normally you have that traditional growth pattern, a very small operation gets a foothold and then you kind of migrate on. We haven't seen too much of that. So there aren't necessarily a ton of good analogs, but everyone that's been successful in those environments have shown notable variances from the norm that we see otherwise.
Excellent. Vivian, I just want to check in with you again to see if your audio is there. You are unmuted, I believe. And you're also very welcome to put a message in the Zoom chat as well. Yay, there you are.
No, it's just Jacqueline, because she actually commented in the other chat. I'm in the other chat, and Vivian said she tried to talk, but she couldn't, and referenced to her earlier questions she had, and they were more primary organizing questions, so I took them on real quick. There was a quick question of being more advantageous to organize as a nonprofit or a for-profit, and I just want to clarify that food co-ops cannot organize as 501c3s if they're going to be primarily grocery businesses, but they can have a 501c3 arm. So, and there's ways to incorporate as a nonprofit at the state level, does not have 501c3 protections, and that's kind of a broader convo. So I'd say, please do reach out to me or FCI, and we can talk about that in more depth. And then there was the question of, can the cost of this process that you guys did be written off on a tax level? And I just, it's a business expense, and it balances out your income, of course, and gives you less taxable income as a cooperative. But so that in that sense, but not like some kind of other specific type of write-off, as far as I know.
Well, and the key point would be that your co-op's going to have to do this work anyway, and spend the money to have the work done anyway. So kind of the innovation and the shift here was just, we really compressed that whole process, and just got it done a lot quickly, and I think quite cost effectively as well, considering how in-depth the final work product ended up being.
I don't know if Dana's still in the room, but I actually be curious. She chatted earlier if she had anything to say about, just because I think you had a good point, Kay, that the board was really prepared for this process. They had the knowledge. They also were willing to really hand over the reins where they needed to, and just overall were great partners. And I wondered if Dana's still here, if she has anything to say about that from their perspective, if a startup was going to attempt something like they did with this.
Unfortunately, Dana has left the room, so I don't think she'll be chiming in. But I do think the board, as we noted in the one slide, the board was ready for this. They were ready to just find out what was going to work in this site, because they, as a co-op and as board members, had fallen in love with the site. They knew in their hearts it was the right place for them, but they of course couldn't move forward if they were being told it was not viable. Reach out to, I'm sure the Chicago Market Board would be happy to answer questions if people have any from them as well. Or Dan now as their CM.
I think also to stress real quick, sorry, Albie, then I'll shut up.
No, that's fine.
Actually, the board went into it though, actually assuming that the feasibility set that this process would not find the site feasible. Mm-hmm. They went in saying, we want to know the truth. We know we're in love with this site, but we want to know the truth. And if the truth is there just is no way forward with this site, we do want to know that. We want to make the right decision for our co-op. So I just want to point to the maturity of, I did not experience them being fixated on this site, trying to make the numbers make it look like this site would work. I think they were initially surprised by the results. And so they just went into it with absolutely the right attitude of responsibility to their co-op. They had a gut instinct and they wanted that tested, but they were open to the real answers no matter what. And I thought that was commendable and is where the board should be coming from.
And honestly, at the beginning, we didn't think we'd be able to give them a different response either. It wasn't until we really understood what was driving their sales projections and understood the implications of what that could mean for them that everything shifted. I mean, we were, for the most part, prepared to tell them, "Yep, the previous work is correct, and it's not a viable situation for you." So I think we were all surprised and delighted with how our report came out and the progress the co-op has made since then. They've really come a long way in the last year, and it's going to be excited to see what's ahead for them. We just have a few minutes left. Dan, any last thoughts, or and Jacqueline, you as well? If there's any last points, I'll leave it open to you, and unless I see any more questions come in or hands raised.
Yeah, I think for me, when I look at the success of this particular approach, it strikes me that oftentimes maybe people do start out with like a consultant that does some things. Maybe they have someone doing some design, but I have seen a lot of siloing, and I think this approach was pretty innovative, and it was actually more effective. And I actually believe, given the stakes, 20,000 is a pittance compared to the value that got generated. I mean, you would have had to go through a lot of things anyway. So we've advanced a lot of pieces that would come later. So I don't think it's wrong to go for a high quality look at what you're doing, even if you're not dealing with an unusual site, but to really get a good firm sense of what's happening. It gives me a lot of assurance as a manager with what I'm dealing with. The other thing I would say is we were, like you say, we may not have expected that this site was useful, but people on the team, any one of us would have been more than willing to be drop the headsman's axe on the thing and just say, look, it doesn't work. I mean, it was the kind of thing where we not only had a sense of professional integrity that was shared, but we really let the data speak for itself. We didn't try to juice it up. I'd heard a story from someone recently, just as an aside, very fast, that there was a board member of a co-op that I won't name the person in the co-op, but in a startup phase, that had told people that pro formas are just a fiction that we use to get what we want. And if we get things open, people just find a way, and that some of these early processes were just hoops that you get through. And I would say if that exists anywhere in any organization that anyone on the call is in, disabuse yourself of that notion immediately. These things need to be rooted in data. They need to be rooted in reason. You need to have a strong sense of logic for why the plan and the analysis says what it says. And you need to ask tough questions. And we didn't get away without any tough questions. That actually just makes things stronger. But this stuff is very critical. And I just, I feel like that taking all this seriously was important, both for the consultant side and the board side. And I think that's part of why we came out with a really good result, of which we're all proud and optimistic, and not just, wow, we produced something to give the appearance of another thing. We really produced something that's solid, and that's why.
And unintentionally, you made your own job easier, Dan, because you've done a lot of the work that's going to be needed, and a lot of the work that actually the new GM needs to do when they come into a new store. So it's going to be exciting to see, what other pieces of this fast track can apply to kind of the next areas of store development that lie ahead for Chicago market. I don't see any other hands. I don't see anything else coming in the Zoom chat. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap up there. I want to thank you all. Thanks to Dan. Thanks to the whole team again. Dan helped out, JQ from FCI, Kevin O'Donnell from Seven Roots did our prepared foods magic, and Carla Kruger from the Retail Planet was our store designer on this project. And we could not have done it without all of us working together. We had a great time doing this project, and yeah, it's becoming fun, and it's starting to be kind of an unexpected business development piece for Firebrand to be the convener of these teams, bringing together the expertise of different people, not only in the co-op world, but in the other sectors that we work in, and bringing great people together, achieving great results that we're all proud of, and having a lot of fun along the way, which always means a great work product for the client at the end of the day. So thank you all, and enjoy. I guess conference is wrapping up now, Deb. Any instructions for the attendees after this?
Be on the lookout for a quick survey so we can start building for next year, and all of the recordings for all the sessions will be available on the Pathable platform for 6 months after the end of the conference, and we'll send you out periodic emails just to remind people of that.
All right, and lots of love to Deb and JQ and the whole team for making this conference happen. Thank you all, and have a great Saturday.
Bye, everyone.